Welcome back everyone to another video. I am super excited about this one. We have got the Moog Muse 8-voice polyphonic synthesizer on deck today, and I'm really excited because this is the 4th ever polyphonic instrument Moog has created. We were lucky enough to get our hands on it, and I'm really excited to show you what this thing can do. We're going to be taking a look at the Arpeggiator and the sequencer, which are both really deep performance features for this instrument, as well as a bunch of the other things like the diffusion delay and other performance capabilities that really make this instrument shine and go beyond the rich sound that we all know about Moog instruments. So let's get into it. So first, a really short history lesson. So this, as I mentioned, this is the 4th polyphonic instrument that Moog has ever created. First, we had the Poly Moog back in the late 70s, and this used what was called step-down oscillators to achieve polyphony for every key on the instrument, but it was a step away from classic Moog circuit design. Next up was the Memory Moog, which was a step back towards the traditional circuit design and was true 6-voice polyphony with its own individual voice architecture and circuits, but it was limited to 6 voices. And then, of course, recently we had the Moog 1, which was touted as, the ultimate Moog synthesizer. You could get it in 8 or 16 voices, and it was just a beast. And now here we have the Muse. It's 8 voices of true polyphonic analog synthesis, and it's bitimbral. So we actually have 2 independent synthesizers that we can layer, stack, or split using the 8 voices of polyphony. So besides being a classic and rich sounding instrument, we actually get 2 of those to play with. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at what we actually have on the instrument. I've brought up an initial patch. We've got 2 oscillators per voice, which are based off of the Moog Voyager circuits. So you can actually see the voices being activated as you press different keys. We've got different controls and wave shaping capabilities. We've got FM and the ability to sync the 2 oscillators together. And then we actually have a 3rd oscillator here, which is actually a modulation audio oscillator. And we can actually go to audio rates or to an LFO rate. And we can send this to different parts of the instrument. This is all fed into this mixer here, which apparently is a bit different to the classic Moog mixer. It doesn't involve soft clipping and instead employs much more clean mixing and gives you this overload circuit to introduce clipping into the mixer. This is fed into 2 classic Moog ladder filters. Both can be a low pass, and filter 1 can also be a high pass. We can also change the order in which they're fed through the 2 filters, and then this is fed into some both a filter envelope and a VCA envelope, so 2 individual envelopes which we can actually loop instead of just having them be triggered by the notes, so that's really cool. And then you can see down here we've actually got the voice control for the 2 timbres, so I can split or stack them and even detune the voices relative to the 2 patches. That's pretty cool. But the first thing I wanted to show you was the panning abilities of the Muse, because this is definitely a rich sounding Moog instrument, but it gives us a whole bunch of ways to modulate and pan the voices through the stereo field, which gives us this really wide, thick sound. So I'm going to load up that patch that you heard at the start, which I have to say is probably my favorite patch so far. It's called Muse Runner. It's kind of like a Vangelis style. I mean, that just sounds awesome. And as you can actually hear, this has got channel aftertouch. So as I'm pressing down on the keyboard, it's opening up the filters, which just sounds like so expressive. If you actually just... Back to the panning capabilities. What we can do is we can just simply pan this left to right. We'll keep it center. Or we can actually spread the voices across the stereo field. So 12 o'clock, all the voices will be panned evenly So if I actually go, I can actually click this button and I get more settings to choose from. I'm going to set it at 12 o'clock so it's spread evenly across the stereo field. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to modulate that using the modulation oscillator. So we can actually press pan, increase the amount of that VCA. We're going to take it off audio rate, change it to a sine wave and give it a really slow. So it's super beautiful. This is then fed through a diffusion delay. The diffusion delay is a stereo digital delay that basically emulates classic digital delay racks from like the 80s and 90s. And don't worry, you can bypass it if you want to maintain a complete analog signal path just by using the mix, and you can also choose which timbre it's sent to. But it sounds really great because you can get everything from like ping pong delays all the way to really smeared sort of almost like reverb echoes, like you can hear in this patch. If I actually take the two off, here's that patch without the diffusion delay. And I'm going to put it on both timbres. So you can generate some really rich textures using that diffusion delay. For modulation, we have two LFOs and a pitch LFO too, which is dedicated and tuned for pitch modulation, which is really cool. And these are easily assignable all through this modulation mapping, where you can basically assign almost any controller to almost any destination on the keyboard. So, you know, Muse definitely has everything that a classic Moog synthesizer has in 8 voices, but it goes beyond that and gives you a sort of, I think, what are really great performance features that takes this to another level in terms of a performance polyphonic synthesizer. So let's look at the Arpeggiator, for instance. The Arpeggiator gives you everything that a classic Arpeggiator does. You know, you can generate simple, we turn it on, just a generic pattern. You can go forward and back, up to 4 octaves. You can also use it using a pattern, or we can go random. But what we can do is in Arpeggiator settings, we can actually change or increase the amount of steps in the arpeggiation pattern. For instance, we have 16 steps here, and I can actually turn on or off different steps in the pattern to create different rhythms. So we get more than just a simple arpeggiation of a chord. So let's, for instance, let's hit this 7th chord. So then if we hit this button here and go into the settings, we can actually customize that even more. We've got divisional clock, swing, all the usual suspects. We can even change how the octave changes based off the pattern. We can actually go, let's go change the note. What does that do? It will change octave every note rather than at the end of the pattern. We've got pivot notes when we're going through forward and back, random lengths for that forward back, pattern direction, but it's even got leapfrogging, which actually lets you jump a step and then step back one, jump another step, step back one, and you can choose how many steps you're leaping ahead to generate almost like cascading arpeggiation. So if we increase that to 2, let's turn on all the steps to actually listen to that properly. So even across 2 octaves, we're actually getting this huge like cascading arpeggiation. So then if I actually change the rhythm of that, so let's increase the range of the arpeggiation to all the way up to 64 steps. So now we've got 64 steps, just top and change different rhythms, second page, blah, 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 blah. And then the last page. Cool. So now when I actually hold that down, cool, so let's actually build a bit of a patch using that and then combine some of the panning and diffusion delay to get this really sort of revolving arpeggiation that sort of bounces through the stereo field. Let's go introduce the second. So I can click hold so I don't actually have to keep holding this. Let's modulate it using the modulation oscillator. We actually lock the diffusion delay to the internal and link them together. Introduce a bit of pitch modulation too, to both oscillators. So I could take that as, I could actually, then assign the aftertouch to then open up the filters or modulate how much the rate of the frequency of the modulation are going to the pan. So we could really get into the weeds there. And I mean, I was sort of just designing a basic patch. You could apply those same modulation and that same arpeggiator to any patch on Muse. So you can see that like the arpeggiator on Muse is much more than just a simple arpeggiator, and it's the same for the sequencer. The sequencer, it's a 64-step sequencer which you can record live into or program step by step. But the interesting thing about the sequencer is that it's actually independent of the patch that you're playing. So you can actually have a sequence playing and then load different patches and experiment with different sounds and different sequences. So this is the sequencer mode. I can actually see it as a piano roll, or I can go into step mode, and it gives me all the information per step. So, and that's including note, gate, velocity, time, and timbre. So I've got it in sequencer view on the programmer. You can see the actual piano roll of the sequence that I've already programmed in earlier. So we just hit play, we can actually hear back. So I've actually recorded a 64-step sequence earlier. So if I can go to step mode, I can see all the values per step, and I can go through each one and adjust accordingly. But there's a couple of things that the sequencer lets you do that really makes it go beyond a normal sequencer into almost like a generative territory. So we've got parameter record, where we can actually record live parameter modulation and changes. We've also got gesture control, which lets you per step change the actual gesture of the note. So if you're unhappy with how you played it, you can gesturally perform the note how you'd like it. But what I think is the most powerful aspect of this sequencer is all the probability parameters it gives you to turn your step sequence into a generative step sequence. If we go into the probability, you'll see all these parameters for generating different notes, gates, and velocities per step. If I select all steps, it's going to apply these percentage chances across the whole sequence. What I can do is note probability gives me a percentage chance that a random note is generated on a step. So if I change that to say, let's say 40%, and then I go back to the sequencer settings, you'll see that I've got it set to a Lydian scale, starting on D sharp, which is where my sequence is based. So back to the probability, there's a 40% chance per step that a random note from the D sharp Lydian scale is played on this sequence. So if we play back my sequence now, we'll actually hear that. Let's increase the percentage. And then I can also change the range. So this is just within a single octave. Let's go 2 octaves. 2 octaves. And we'll say a 60% chance that there's a different note. Then we'll also say what a 50% chance of a different gate probability. So that's the actual gate length. And then let's go velocity probability. Let's say also 45% chance. The range, let's go all the way up to 100 for the velocity range. Cool, so now we've got random gates, velocities, and notes. Let's see what happens. Cool, so it's actually getting like different pedal notes and everything in between. If we actually go back to our step sequence, we can also employ what's called coin toss. And what coin toss does is it flips a coin on a step and chooses between a second set of notes for that step. So if I go shift and settings, you'll see coin toss, and it will actually enter the coin toss setting. So I can actually step sequence a different set of notes per step. Let's just go step 1, hold it. Let's go a nice big E flat chord. And then let's go up to the 32. So that means when those steps come around, it'll flip a coin and choose between the 2 sets of notes. And that is based off the note probability chance. So let's go back to the probability settings and see what happens. Cool, so now let's bring back some more of that stereo field and modulation to make it a bit more interesting patch. That kind of shows you how deep you can go with a single sequence. But what you can then do is you can actually chain multiple sequences together to play one after the other. So in sequencer view, hold shift for additional settings and I press sequence chain. I can actually chain together a whole bunch of sequences within this bank of sequences to actually play one after the other. And then in those sequences, I can actually dictate which step gets played over which timbre. So you can really get down into the weeds and program sequences to just evolve and like stretch and just go beyond a simple set of notes playing one after the other. So there you go. I hope that gives you an idea of how deep this instrument can get. I mean, it's just really beautiful sounding. It gives you everything you would expect from a Moog synthesizer and then some from the arpeggiator and the sequencer. Let me know what you think about this instrument below. Remember to like and subscribe if you like this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.